She just wanted to vent to her friend, but one wrong click turned her life upside down. And her boss heard everything. What happened the next day? No one expected. If you like stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post every day. Continuing. The late afternoon sun painted the windows of the tall commercial building in the heart of London golden. Louisa Matthews sighed, running her fingers through her dark hair that insisted on escaping the improvised bun from hours before. 27 years old, graduated with honors in business administration from the LSE, and there she was, exhausted, frustrated, and with an impossible deadline to deliver the quarterly customer service report. The digital clock in the corner of her screen showed 7:42 p.m. Most of her colleagues had already left, leaving behind only the monotonous hum of the air conditioning and the occasional clink of the elevator. Apex Corporate Solutions, one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the country, was known for two things: above-average salaries and unbearable pressure. Louisa had been there for 3 years, having risen from junior analyst to customer service coordinator. Her department was responsible for maintaining customer satisfaction at the standards of excellence that made Apex a national benchmark. At least, that's how it was until his arrival 2 weeks ago. Gabriel Maxwell, the new commercial director, hired at a premium from the main competitor. 38 years old, an MBA from Harvard, international experience, and a track record of results that made shareholders smile. The problem wasn't his credentials, those were impeccable. The problem was everything else: the way he entered meetings without an invitation, how he dismantled presentations with biting questions, how he spoke softly and slowly when he disagreed with something, forcing everyone to lean in to hear him. Coordinator Matthews. Louisa almost spilled her coffee hearing the male voice behind her. She turned to find Gabriel standing at the door of her office, the sleeves of his navy blue dress shirt carefully folded to his elbows, his tie slightly loosened after a long day. He held a black leather briefcase, one of those too expensive to be bought with a normal salary. "Director Maxwell," she replied, disguising her surprise and adjusting her posture in the chair. "I thought everyone had left." "Evidently not everyone," he replied, with that half-smile that seemed more a challenge than a gesture of sympathy. His eyes scanned the small but organized room, momentarily lingering on the photograph on her desk, where Louisa appeared with her younger sister on a beach. "The last quarter's figures. I need them by tomorrow, 8 a.m. Louisa felt her stomach sink. "But the deadline is Friday. We're still collecting data from the regions and—" "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., he repeated, without changing his tone. "We have a meeting with the Sterling Group at 10 a.m. They are deciding whether to renew with us or switch to Zenith. I need those numbers. But there won't be time for detailed analysis, cross-validation, or for—" "You're efficient, Matthews. Your track record at the company proves it." He took a step back, preparing to leave. "If you need help, Priscilla from Analytics will be staying late today. Good night." Before Louisa could argue, he had already left. She took a deep breath, mentally counting to 10 to keep from screaming. Who did he think he was? It was true he was technically her superior, but there were procedures, agreed deadlines, a structure that worked perfectly before his arrival. 3 hours later, with her eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and graphs, Louisa finally finished a preliminary version of the report. It wasn't ideal, far from it, but it would have to do. She sent the file to his email, put her phone and laptop in her bag, and practically dragged herself to the elevator. The taxi dropped her off in front of the middle-class building in the Islington neighborhood, where she shared an apartment with Mary, her best friend since university. The smell of Thai food in the hallway indicated that Mary had ordered delivery again, which meant she'd had a day as terrible as hers at the architecture firm where she worked. "I'm home," Louisa announced, throwing her keys onto the entrance table and kicking off her high heels as if they were medieval torture instruments. Mary appeared at the kitchen door, holding a container of yakisoba and smiling sympathetically. Her red hair was tied in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing the oversized Pearl Jam t-shirt that served as her official uniform for venting nights. "Looks like someone had a worse day than mine. And a client actually asked me today if I couldn't feminize the design of an industrial warehouse." Louisa collapsed onto the living room sofa, undoing her bun and freeing her dark curls. She let her head fall back, and closed her eyes. He's unbearable, Mary, seriously unbearable. The hot Harvard director? Mary asked, handing Louisa a container of food and sitting beside her. He's not hot, she protested automatically, though she knew she was lying. Gabriel Maxwell was absurdly attractive, with that defined jawline, hazel eyes that seemed to read thoughts, and a physique that his tailored suit couldn't completely disguise. And even if he were, his arrogance neutralizes any attractiveness. Right, Mary said, raising an eyebrow. And what did he do today, besides existing and breathing the same air as you? Louisa recounted the report, the impossible deadline, the unpaid overtime, the unnecessary pressure. As she spoke, her frustration grew. Mary listened, nodding and making occasional comments like, "What an ass," or "You should sue for workplace harassment," even though they both knew nothing Gabriel had done legally constituted harassment. After finishing dinner and her second glass of wine, Louisa was completely uninhibited. She picked up her phone and opened WhatsApp. "I'm going to send you a voice message saying everything I think about that arrogant jerk. Seriously, I need to get it out or I'll explode." Mary shrugged, pouring more wine for both of them. "Go for it, I'm all ears." Louisa pressed the record button and let her frustration flow. "Seriously, Mary, I can't stand that pretentious guy anymore. Just because he's hot and has that air of power, he thinks he can control everyone. Arrogant, authoritarian, and, worse, irresistible. I'm so mad at myself for not being able to look at him without imagining things." She finished the recording, smiled with vindictive satisfaction, and, without looking closely at the screen, sent the audio. Only then did she notice horror washed over her face, freezing her smile into a mask of panic. "What's wrong?" Mary asked, leaning in to see the screen. "My God, don't tell me you—" "I sent it to the company-wide group," Louisa whispered, her voice failing. "The damn group with all employees, including him." The Apex official group had exactly 94 participants, including the entire board of directors, managers, coordinators, and analysts. Created for important communications, the group had become a mix of official announcements, deadline reminders, and occasionally birthday wishes. But never, ever had it been the stage for a rant like that. "Delete it! Delete it now!" Mary shouted, almost knocking over her glass. "I can't! It's already been seen by, my God, 15 people!" The two blue ticks next to the message confirmed the nightmare. The audio was there, exposed, traveling from phone to phone, probably being forwarded in private chats, maybe even being transcribed by someone particularly cruel. Louisa felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her career had just gone down the drain. 3 years of dedication, sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, all destroyed by 15 seconds of impulsive ranting under the influence of wine. "He's going to fire me. It's obvious he's going to fire me." Maybe not. Maybe he won't even listen. He probably mutes work groups like normal people. "Mary, he's a commercial director. He probably sleeps with his phone under his pillow so he doesn't miss any notifications." They both fell silent, staring at the phone screen as if it were a bomb about to explode. The views kept climbing. 27, 34, 41. "There's still time to resign before I get fired," Louisa finally said, throwing her phone away as if it burned. "Or maybe I can claim I was hacked, or that I was drunk, or that I suffered a temporary psychotic break." Mary bit her lip, trying not to laugh at the situation despite its gravity. "I could give a statement as your flatmate, saying you were clearly insane when you recorded that, like possessed by spirits." Louisa threw a cushion at her, but couldn't help a shaky smile. It was laugh to keep from crying. "The worst part," she continued, lying on the sofa and covering her face with her arm, "is that I didn't even lie. He is arrogant, he is authoritarian, and he is absurdly, you know, hot," Mary completed, laughing. "Irresistible." "Shut up." Louisa's phone vibrated with a new notification. Both froze. With slow movements, as if disarming a bomb, Louisa stretched out her arm and picked up the device. It was a private message from Paul, a colleague from the finance department. "Louisa, everything okay? I just heard your audio in the group. I don't know if you realized, but—" She threw the phone back on the sofa without finishing reading. More notifications arrived, probably similar messages from other colleagues, a mix of genuine concern and morbid curiosity. "I'm going to have to move country," Louisa murmured, feeling a headache forming. "I'll have to learn Icelandic and become a sheep herder." "I've always wanted to visit Iceland," Mary commented, trying to lighten the mood. "But seriously, Lou, what happened? Tomorrow you walk into the office with your head held high. Apologize if necessary and move on. You're too good at what you do to be fired over an audio message." Louisa wanted to believe that. She really did. But she knew the corporate environment well enough to know that reputations were built over years and destroyed in seconds. And worse, she knew Gabriel Maxwell well enough to know he didn't tolerate failures, especially failures involving his name and his authority. That night, Louisa didn't sleep. She mentally replayed every second of the audio, every word, every tone of voice. She thought of defense strategies, apologies, resignation letters. She updated her LinkedIn at 3:14 a.m., polishing achievements and adding skills. Around 5 a.m., exhausted but unable to rest, she got up and took the longest shower of her life, as if she could wash away the shame along with the sweat. She chose her outfit carefully, a dark grey power suit that conveyed seriousness, a basic white blouse underneath, discreet but comfortable heels, just in case she needed to run out of the building after being publicly humiliated. She tied her hair in a severe bun, like armor against looks of pity or amusement. The commute to work was torture. Every unread message on her phone seemed like a threat. Every glance from the rideshare driver in the rearview mirror seemed like judgment. Upon arriving at the Apex building, she took 3 deep breaths before passing through the security turnstile. In the elevator, she met Priscilla from Analytics, who immediately averted her gaze, feigning great interest in the numbered buttons. An awkward silence filled the cabin. When they reached the 17th floor, Priscilla practically leaped out before the door even fully opened. The corridors were unusually silent for a Wednesday morning. Conversations ceased when Louisa passed, replaced by poorly disguised whispers and muffled giggles. On her way to her office, she crossed paths with Charles from marketing, who smiled sympathetically and murmured, "Stay strong," as if she were terminally ill. At her desk, she found the report she had finished the night before, printed and with several notes in red pen in the margins. The note on top of it, in firm masculine handwriting, simply read, "Corrected. Resend by 7:30 a.m." The corrections were merciless, not just data errors or mistaken analyses, but even formatting and writing style issues. An entire sentence had been crossed out and rewritten, and the new version, Louisa had to admit, was more concise and impactful. She worked furiously on the adjustments, ignoring the messages that kept arriving on her phone and the growing buzz outside. At 7:22 a.m., she sent the corrected version by email and breathed a sigh of relief, at least for that small triumph. At 7:45 a.m., the announcement came. Extraordinary General Meeting, Main Conference Room, 8 a.m. sharp. Mandatory attendance for all coordinators and directors. Louisa's heart almost stopped. This was it. The public execution. She would probably be fired in front of everyone. An example of what happens to those who disrespect hierarchy. The conference room gradually filled. Louisa chose a seat at the back, trying to become invisible. Some people cast sympathetic glances her way. Others seemed to be watching a slow-motion car crash, unable to avert their gaze from the impending disaster. At exactly 8 a.m., Gabriel Maxwell entered the room. As always, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, white shirt, burgundy tie, as always, emanating that aura of unquestionable authority. His eyes swept the room, momentarily pausing on Louisa, who felt her face burn. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice deep and controlled. "Thank you for attending. I'll be brief." A deathly silence fell over the room. Louisa could hear her own heart pounding in her temples. "Last night I received Coordinator Matthews' quarterly report. After some corrections, we now have a document that adequately represents our position with the Sterling Group." He held up a printed copy of the report. "Thanks to this, we are prepared for today's meeting. Thank you, Matthews, for your dedication outside of business hours." Louisa blinked, confused. Nothing about the audio, nothing about insubordination, nothing about hot and irresistible. Furthermore, Gabriel continued, as if reading her thoughts, I would like to announce some structural changes. Effective today, I will be directly supervising the customer service department, personally. All eyes converged on Louisa. Her mouth went dry. There it was. She wouldn't be fired. She would be micromanaged until she resigned. It was a known corporate tactic. Make an employee's life so unbearable that they quit themselves, saving the company from labor lawsuits. This is because, Gabriel continued, without altering his tone, we have identified this department as critical for our client retention, especially in the current competitive landscape. Coordinator Matthews will remain at the head of the team, reporting directly to me in weekly individual meetings. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur for Louisa. Numbers, targets, restructurings were discussed. She nodded mechanically, took automatic notes, responded when questioned, all on autopilot while her mind tried to process what had happened. Or rather, what hadn't happened. When the meeting ended, people began to stand up and leave. Louisa remained seated, tidying her notes with slow movements, waiting for the room to empty so she could escape without further confrontation. Matthews, Gabriel's voice reached her when she was almost at the door. A moment. She froze, her body tense like a violin string about to snap. She turned slowly, finding him standing beside the conference table, organizing some papers in his leather briefcase. Yes, Director Maxwell? Your first individual meeting with me will be today, 5 p.m., my office. He did not look up from the documents. Bring the satisfaction data for the 3 main financial sector clients and the turnover report for the last 6 months. Louisa nodded mechanically. Yes, sir. When she was already at the door, his voice reached her again. And Louisa? Yes. Finally, he looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something indescribable in that gaze, a mixture of severity and amusement. Remember to double-check the recipient before sending anything, especially audio messages. Her face burned as if she had been slapped. He knew, of course, and he knew. Everyone knew. And now he would have her under his direct supervision, a constant reminder of the biggest professional mistake of her life. Yes, sir, she managed to say, her voice almost a whisper. It won't happen again. Good, he replied, returning to his papers. I await your report at 5 p.m. Louisa practically fled the conference room, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through her chest. The humiliation burned within, but there was also something else, a spark of defiance. Did he want to intimidate her, make her resign? She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She would prove her worth. She would show that one slip-up did not define her competence. Back at her desk, she opened her computer and began working on the requested reports. She ignored the messages on her phone, the glances from colleagues, the whispers in the corridors. She had a mission now to survive Gabriel Maxwell, to survive and, if possible, to impress him so professionally that he would completely forget the audio incident. But as she organized graphs and analyzed data, a rebellious part of her mind insisted on repeating the words that had escaped in a moment of frustration: arrogant, authoritarian, and irresistible. What a dangerous combination. What an explosive mix for the coming days, weeks, perhaps months of working under his direct supervision. The days following the audio incident were a strange balance between professional tension and forbidden attraction. Gabriel Maxwell kept his word. He directly supervised Louisa's work, with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. Reports that once passed without question now returned covered in red pen annotations. Presentations were mercilessly dissected, each slide analyzed, each graph questioned, each conclusion challenged. This isn't supervision, it's persecution, Louisa vented to Mary during dinner, 2 weeks after the fateful audio. And today he made me redo an entire analysis because, according to him, the conclusions lacked depth. What the hell does that even mean? Mary bit into a slice of pizza thoughtfully. Maybe he just wants to make sure you're as good as your resume says. Or maybe he wants to punish me until I give up and resign. Or maybe, Mary smiled slyly, he's as attracted to you as you are to him, and this is the only professional way to spend time together. Louisa threw a napkin at her friend. That's not funny. But there was, perhaps, a grain of truth in that provocation, because despite his strictness and relentless demands, Louisa occasionally caught something in Gabriel's eyes that wasn't just professional evaluation, a look that lasted a second longer than necessary. A half smile when she countered an argument with concrete data. Once, when she presented a particularly creative solution to a problem with a difficult client, she had the impression of seeing him genuinely impressed before the professional mask fell back over his features. The weekly individual meetings soon became bi-weekly, then almost daily. The pretext was always professional, but the air between them carried something denser than mere discussions about KPIs and customer satisfaction. It was a careful dance, where both knew the steps, but pretended to be merely following protocol. It was during one of these meetings, on a rainy Friday afternoon, that Gabriel surprised her with an announcement. Sterling Investments is organizing an event in Brighton to present its new investor platform. Our CEO won't be able to attend, so I'll be representing the company. He paused, watching her carefully. And you'll be coming with me. Louisa almost choked on her coffee. Me? You know the account best. You've worked with them from the beginning, haven't you? It was true. Sterling had been her first major client when she took over as coordinator. She knew all the details of the relationship, the strengths, the sensitive areas. Yes, but Paul from finance also knows the account well, and Richard from IT understands the technological part better, and... I've decided, Gabriel interrupted her, in a tone that allowed no discussion. We leave Sunday evening. We return Wednesday morning. My assistant has already arranged flights and hotel reservations. Details will be sent to your email. And so, without time to fully process what that meant, Louisa found herself packing formal wear, business casual, and a few leisure items, just in case there was time, for 3 days in Brighton with the man she had called hot and irresistible in an audio message leaked to the entire company. "This is a trap," Mary declared, sitting on the bed as she watched her friend carefully fold a navy silk blouse. "He's going to take you far away, without witnesses, and fire you, or seduce you, or both." "Thanks for the moral support," Louisa replied ironically. "It's a strictly professional trip. The Blue Ocean Hotel has separate rooms, packed agendas, and will be surrounded by clients, potential investors, and competitors. There will be no room for anything but work." Mary raised an eyebrow. "And yet you're taking that new lingerie from Liz that we bought last month." "It's comfortable," Louisa replied quickly, hiding the black lace set under a blazer. "And it means nothing." On Sunday evening, they met at London City Airport. Gabriel was already there when Louisa arrived, talking on the phone with a serious expression. He was wearing dark jeans, a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and a discreet but clearly expensive watch on his left wrist. Without the formal office attire, he seemed more approachable, more human, dangerously attractive. "Matthews," he greeted her, ending the call. "Punctual. Good." "Always am," she replied, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the slight tremor in her stomach. The flight of just over an hour passed in relative silence. Gabriel reviewed documents on his tablet, while Louisa pretended to read a book, though her mind was far from the plot. Side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in the confined space of the aircraft, it was impossible not to notice his subtle cologne, the way his fingers glided across the screen with confident movements, how he occasionally frowned when something displeased him. They arrived in Brighton late at night. The driver sent by Sterling awaited them, taking them to the Blue Ocean Hotel, a 5-star beachfront hotel with a privileged view of Brighton Beach. In the elegant lobby, decorated with shades of blue and light wood, they received their room keys. "Get some good rest," Gabriel said, when the elevator stopped on Louisa's floor. "Tomorrow starts early. Breakfast at 7 a.m., lobby at 8 a.m. "Yes, sir," she replied automatically, rolling her small suitcase out of the elevator. He held the door before it closed. "And Louisa." It was the first time he had called her by her first name. The sound caused a strange vibration in her chest. "Here, I'm not your boss," he continued, with a slight smile. "You can call me Gabriel." Before she could respond, the doors closed. The room was spacious and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows that would offer a spectacular ocean view in the morning. But Louisa barely noticed these details. Her mind replayed the sound of her own name on his lips, The way his eyes seemed different when they weren't surrounded by the formality of the office. She shook her head, pushing away those thoughts. She was there for work. He was there for work. Anything else would be inappropriate, unethical, and potentially disastrous for her career. With this determination, she took a hot shower, checked the next day's agenda one more time, and forced herself to sleep. The morning brought sun, sea breeze, and the lively buzz of executives having breakfast in the hotel's panoramic restaurant. Louisa, punctual as always, wore a teal sheath dress with a light blazer over it, her hair tied in an elegant bun. Gabriel was already there, talking to two men in suits. He waved discreetly when he saw her, indicating that she should join them. With a professional smile on her lips, she approached. "Louisa, these are Charles Sterling, CEO of Sterling Investments, and Mark Thompson, Director of New Business." Gabriel introduced. "Gentlemen, this is Louisa Matthews, our customer service coordinator and directly responsible for your account." "Ah, we finally meet the face behind the efficient emails," smiled Charles. A man in his 50s with graying hair and a confident demeanor. "Your team always solves our problems before we even realize we have one." "It's my job," Louisa replied with a genuine smile, feeling momentarily more relaxed. This she knew how to do. Charm clients, build relationships, solve problems. The day was a marathon of meetings, presentations, and networking. Sterling was launching a revolutionary automated investment platform and wanted Apex as a partner for its entire communication and customer service strategy. The event gathered about 50 people, including executives, investors, and potential partners. To Louisa's surprise, Gabriel showed confidence in her knowledge, frequently deferring to her for specific details or delegating entire parts of discussions. They formed a surprisingly effective duo, she with detailed knowledge of the client's history, he with the broader strategic vision. Around 5 p.m., after a particularly intense Q&A session with investors, they found a moment to breathe on one of the convention center balconies. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden hues over the sea that stretched to the horizon. "You did well today," Gabriel commented, handing her a bottle of water. "You know the client better than I expected." "Thank you," Louisa replied, genuinely surprised by the compliment. "I've been on the account since the beginning. They're important to us." "And they clearly like you," he observed, a slight smile on his lips. "Charles Sterling was impressed with your analysis of user segmentation." "It was teamwork," she said automatically, always uncomfortable receiving individual credit. Gabriel watched her for a moment, as if trying to decipher something. "Do you always do that? Minimize your accomplishments?" The question caught her off guard. "I wasn't minimizing, just being honest." Was all he replied, his gaze returning to the horizon. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the waves below and distant voices from the event. For a moment, they weren't boss and subordinate. There were no hierarchies or protocols, just two people sharing a calm moment after an intense day. "Why did you choose to work in customer service?" Gabriel asked suddenly, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. Another unexpected question. In over 3 weeks of working directly with him, it was the first time he had shown interest in anything beyond numbers, targets, and results. "I like solving real problems," she replied after a moment's reflection. "Not just theoretical or hypothetical ones, but problems that affect people. When a client calls frustrated, confused, sometimes even furious, and I manage to turn that into satisfaction, it's gratifying." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing every word. "Interesting. Most people would say something about career progression, better salaries." Louisa shrugged. "That's important too, but it's not what gets me out of bed every morning." Gabriel turned to face her, with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was curiosity there, certainly, but also something more intense. "You are surprising, Louisa Matthews," he said finally, his voice lower than normal. Before she could process the meaning of those words or the effect they had on her body, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mark Thompson. "Ah, there you are. The cocktail reception is starting, and Charles wants to introduce you to some international investors." The moment, whatever it was, had passed. Gabriel resumed his professional posture. Louisa straightened her shoulders, and both followed Mark back to the main hall. The cocktail reception was sophisticated without being ostentatious. Champagne, elaborate canapes, discreet background music. Louisa navigated easily between groups, exchanging cards, answering technical questions about Apex, demonstrating deep industry knowledge. From time to time, her eyes met Gabriel's across the room, and something silent seemed to pass between them. It was during one of these exchanges of glances that Louisa noticed the arrival of a woman who immediately drew attention. Tall, slender, light brown hair falling in soft waves to her shoulders, wearing a black dress that seemed simple at first glance, but certainly cost more than Louisa's monthly salary. She had the kind of presence that didn't need to shout to be noticed. The newcomer walked directly to Gabriel, who smiled in a way Louisa had never seen before, a genuine, relaxed, familiar smile. They embraced, not the quick, formal hug of professional acquaintances, but the lingering embrace of people who share a history. "Who is that with Gabriel?" Louisa asked Mark, who was passing by with a glass of champagne. "Isabella Vance," he replied, following her gaze, "CEO of Vance Capital, one of the country's biggest angel investors. She has an incredible nose for promising startups." He paused, watching the two converse animatedly. "And his old girlfriend, so they say. They broke up when he went to Harvard, but they remain close." Louisa felt an inexplicable tightening in her chest. "I see. They make a powerful couple, don't they? Imagine the children, intelligence, beauty, and a considerable fortune," Mark commented casually, without noticing her discomfort. "Excuse me," Louisa murmured, moving away toward the bar. She needed something stronger than champagne. She ordered a gin and tonic and watched from a distance as Gabriel and Isabella conversed with familiarity and ease. She laughed at something he said, lightly touching his arm. He leaned slightly closer when she spoke, as if every word was too precious to risk not hearing. "First time at the event?" The male voice beside her brought her back to reality. She turned to find a young man, perhaps in his early 30s, dark hair, light eyes, an easy smile. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that screamed old money. "Yes," Louisa replied, trying to regain her professional composure. "Louisa Matthews, Apex Corporate Solutions." "Richard Miles, R&M Investments." He introduced himself, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident. "I saw your presentation earlier today. Impressive, especially the part about segmenting users by behavior rather than demographics." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely surprised by the specific comment. "Most people only pay attention to the colorful charts." Richard chuckled, a pleasant and sincere sound. "I pay attention to everything, especially when presented by someone so competent." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And attractive." On another occasion, at another time, Louisa might have politely distanced herself from such a direct flirtation in a professional setting. But that night, with the gin and tonic slightly blurring her judgment, and the image of Gabriel and Isabella still fresh in her mind, she smiled. "Are you always so direct, Mr. Miles?" "Richard, please," he corrected, moving a little closer. "And yes, I believe life is too short for games. If I see something that interests me, I show interest." The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Richard was intelligent, good-humored, and, Louisa had to admit, extremely charming. They talked about the financial market, about London versus Brighton, about the madness that was the corporate world. He was a good listener, asked relevant questions, laughed at the right moments, and more importantly, he made Louisa feel seen, valued. "The air here is getting stuffy," Richard commented after her second gin and tonic. "How about we continue this conversation on the balcony? The nighttime ocean view is spectacular." Louisa hesitated for a moment. Part of her knew she should continue circulating, talking to other potential clients. The rational, professional part. But another part, perhaps the one that had been silenced by weeks of tension and repressed attraction, simply wanted to follow Richard away from that hall, away from Gabriel and Isabella. "Why not?" she finally replied, finishing her drink. The balcony was wide, with a view of the beach lit by the full moon. The sound of the waves created a perfect soundtrack for the mild night. A few guests chatted in small groups, But there was a more secluded corner with 2 wicker sofas facing the sea. That's where Richard led her. The conversation continued, now in a lower, more intimate tone. Richard sat a little closer than would be strictly professional. Louisa didn't pull away. There was something liberating about simply being an attractive woman on a beautiful night, instead of the efficient coordinator trying to prove her worth. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you today?" Richard asked, his eyes fixed on hers. "What?" Louisa replied, her voice slightly hoarse. "That you were in the wrong place," he said, leaning closer. "Someone with your talent shouldn't be in a traditional consulting firm. You should be in a more dynamic, innovative environment. Like a startup, perhaps, or an investment fund." "Like yours?" she asked with a half-smile. "Possibly," he smiled back, his eyes briefly dropping to her lips. "We are always looking for exceptional talent." It was an obvious flirtatious line, almost cliché, but strangely effective at that moment, in that context. When Richard leaned in even closer, clearly intending to kiss her, Louisa did not recoil. Part of her, the rebellious, impulsive, perhaps hurt part, wanted that kiss. She wanted the validation, the feeling of genuine desire, without hierarchical complications or power games. Their lips almost touched when a familiar, deep voice cut through the moment like a sharp blade. "Matthews, we need to talk now." Gabriel stood a few steps away, his expression completely closed off. His eyes darkened in a way Louisa had never seen before. He seemed furious, but controllably furious. The most dangerous kind. Richard slowly moved away, showing no embarrassment. "Maxwell, I didn't see you there. We were just—" "I'm sure you were," Gabriel interrupted him coldly. "Unfortunately, I need to steal my colleague for an urgent matter." Before either could protest, Gabriel took Louisa by the elbow, gently but firmly, guiding her away. She followed him, partly in shock, partly indignant. He led her through the hall, past groups of guests who barely noticed their swift passage, until they reached an empty side corridor. Only then did he release her arm. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low but intense. "Me? What are you doing?" Louisa retorted, indignation overcoming her initial surprise. "You have no right to drag me away like that in front of potential clients." "Richard Miles is not a potential client," Gabriel replied, his eyes fixed on hers. "He's an opportunist known for using questionable methods to obtain privileged information, including seducing female employees of competing companies." Louisa felt her face burn with shame and anger. "Are you implying that I would share confidential information, that I am so easily manipulated?" "I'm saying he has a reputation," Gabriel replied, a little softer now, "and that you seemed vulnerable." "I wasn't vulnerable," she protested, crossing her arms defensively. "I was having a pleasant conversation with someone who showed genuine interest in my work, unlike certain people who were too busy reminiscing with ex-girlfriends." The words escaped before she could contain them. A heavy silence fell between them. Gabriel stared at her, a complex expression taking over his face, surprise, confusion, and then, slowly, understanding. "Isabella is not my ex-girlfriend," he said finally, his voice softer. "She's my cousin." It was Louisa's turn to be silent, trying to process the information. "Mark Thompson said—" "Mark Thompson loves gossip and assumptions," Gabriel interrupted her. "Isabella and I grew up together. Our parents are siblings. She helped me during my MBA when I went through a difficult time. Hence the closeness." Louisa felt ridiculously foolish and exposed. She had just practically admitted she was jealous, something she hadn't even recognized herself until she said it aloud. I didn't know," she murmured, looking away. "Clearly," Gabriel replied, an almost amused tone now coloring his voice. "So that's why you suddenly decided to pay attention to Richard. It wasn't because of that," Louisa tried to deny, but even she didn't completely believe her own words. Gabriel took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The corridor was deserted, the music and voices from the event just a distant murmur. "Louisa," he said, her name like a caress on his lips. "Look at me." She raised her eyes, meeting his. The intensity there almost made her recoil. "Since that audio," he continued, his voice lower now, "I've been trying to keep my distance, to behave professionally, to ignore this tension between us. But it's becoming impossible." Louisa's heart raced. She felt the air escape her lungs as if she had forgotten how to breathe. "We're colleagues," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "You're my superior. This would be complicated." "Extremely," he agreed, without backing down. "Unethical, according to company rules. Potentially damaging to your career, to mine too." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And yet, here we are. Gabriel." His name came out as a sigh. "You destabilize me," he admitted, the words loaded with raw honesty. "Since the first day, your competence, your intelligence, the way you defend your ideas even when I disagree. And then that audio." A slight smile touched his lips. "I confess, hearing you thought I was irresistible didn't help my attempt to keep my distance." Louisa closed her eyes, the shame of that moment returning. "It was a mistake. I was frustrated, tired, and sincere," he completed. His hand moved slowly, touching her face delicately, as if asking permission. "I'm being sincere now too. I can't pretend I don't feel anything anymore." His touch was warm against her skin. Louisa knew she should pull away, retreat, set clear boundaries, but her body seemed to have forgotten all corporate rules, all professional conduct manuals. She leaned slightly towards that hand, her eyes meeting his again. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely," he agreed, moving closer. The first kiss was hesitant, almost a question, lips lightly touching, testing, exploring unknown territory. Louisa felt a tremor run through her body, like an electric current. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Hers rose to his chest, feeling his accelerated heart beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. The second kiss was different, deeper, more urgent, releasing weeks of repressed tension, of disguised glances, of denied desires. Her fingers intertwined in his hair, while his hands ran down her back, holding her firmly against his body. When they finally separated, both breathless, the world around them seemed to have disappeared. There was no event, no apex, no hierarchy, just them, lost in each other. "This complicates everything," Louisa whispered, her forehead resting against his chest, listening to the rapid beats of his heart. "Yes," Gabriel agreed, his fingers tracing gentle circles on her back. "But maybe it's worth it." They stayed like that for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened, the line they had crossed. It was Gabriel who finally broke the silence. "We should go back," he said reluctantly. "Our absence must have been noticed by now." Louisa nodded, pulling away to compose herself. She adjusted her dress, checked that her makeup hadn't smudged, tried to tame her slightly disheveled hair. "How do I look?" she asked, feeling strangely shy under his gaze. "Perfect," Gabriel replied, with a smile she had never seen before. "Disarmed, genuine, almost vulnerable, but with a suspicious lipstick mark on your neck." Louisa's eyes widened, her hand flying to her neck. "What?" He laughed, a surprisingly light sound coming from him. "I'm kidding. You're impeccable." He paused, his eyes becoming serious again. "But we need to talk about this. About us. About how to proceed." "I know," she agreed, reality beginning to assert itself again. "But not now. Not here. Tomorrow," he suggested, "after the meetings, we can have dinner somewhere quiet, away from the hotel." Louisa nodded. "Tomorrow." They returned to the event separately, minutes apart, like criminals trying not to arouse suspicion. The rest of the night was a blur for Louisa. Polite smiles, automatic conversations, exchanging business cards. Her body was there, but her mind was completely occupied by the taste of his lips, the warmth of his touch, the promise of tomorrow. When she finally retired to her room, hours later, she found a text message on her phone. "Can't stop thinking about you. Good night. G." Simple as that, direct as that, and enough to keep her awake half the night, replaying every second of that encounter in the corridor, every word, every touch, every kiss. What had she done? What did it mean for her career, for her future at the company. And why, despite all the risks, couldn't she regret it? She fell asleep with those questions still unanswered, her phone clutched to her chest, his taste still on her lips, and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The next morning dawned with the brightened sky painted in shades of blue and gold. Louisa woke to the gentle sound of waves and sunlight filtering through the semi-open curtains. For a moment, before reality fully caught up with her, she felt only a tranquil satisfaction. Then the memories of the previous night flooded her consciousness. The dark corridor, the mutual confession, the kisses that changed everything. She sat up with a start, checking the clock. 6:40. She would have to hurry for breakfast at 7, followed by a full morning of meetings with the Sterling team. Meetings alongside Gabriel, who was now much more than her director. In the shower, she let the warm water cascade over her tense shoulders while her mind raced. What had happened could not simply be ignored, nor could it continue without consequences. Apex's policy on relationships between employees of different hierarchical levels was clear. They had to be reported to HR, almost always resulting in the transfer of one of those involved to another department. In the worst case, especially when it involved a director, dismissal was the most common outcome, usually for the more vulnerable party in the equation. "Great job, Louisa," she muttered to herself as she dressed. Years building a career just to throw it away for a pair of green eyes and a kiss in a corridor. But it hadn't just been a kiss, and she knew it. The connection between them, that constant electricity, had been building for weeks, perhaps since their very first meeting, since the moment their eyes first met in that conference room. She took a deep breath, assessing her image in the mirror. She chose a discreet navy midi dress with small white details, formal but not severe. She tied her hair in an elegant ponytail, light makeup just enough to disguise the dark circles from her restless night, professional, composed, the opposite of the turmoil she felt inside. At 7 o'clock sharp, she entered the hotel restaurant. Her eyes immediately searched for Gabriel, locating him at a table near the panoramic windows. He was alone, checking something on his phone while drinking coffee. As if sensing her presence, he looked up at the exact moment she spotted him. A small smile appeared at the corner of his lips, not the polite, distant smile of the director, but something more intimate, almost secret. Louisa felt her heart quicken. "Good morning," she said, as she approached, trying to keep her voice steady and professional. "Good morning," he replied, indicating the chair opposite him. "Did you sleep well?" The simple question carried layers of meaning. Louisa sat down, pouring herself coffee from the small thermos on the table. "Not really," she admitted, keeping her voice low. "A lot on my mind." "Me too," he confessed, leaning slightly forward. His hands were inches from hers on the white tablecloth. "We need to talk." "I know," she agreed. "But now isn't the time. We have the new project's presentation in 30 minutes. Gabriel nodded, leaning back in his chair. In that brief moment, they seemed like two ordinary lovers discussing plans for the day, rather than superior and subordinate about to face the consequences of a crossed professional line. "Tonight," he said finally, "dinner. I've already made a reservation at a discreet place, away from the event circuit. We can talk without interruptions." Louisa agreed with a nod, her stomach tightening in nervous anticipation. The morning passed in a blur of presentations, graphs, and technical discussions. Both maintained impeccable professionalism, interacting as they always did in the corporate environment. He, strategic and incisive. She, detailed and persuasive. To an outside observer, nothing seemed different. But for Louisa, each time their eyes met for an extra second, each moment their fingers accidentally touched while passing documents, it was like a small electric shock. During lunch with Sterling executives, they sat on opposite sides of the table. A seemingly casual decision Louisa suspected was intentional on his part, to maintain physical distance to preserve focus. It only partially worked, even without words, without touches. The awareness of each other's presence was almost palpable. It wasn't until late afternoon, after the last meeting of the day, that they met again alone. Gabriel caught up with her in the corridor, leading to the elevators. "So let's meet in the lobby at 80, he said in a low voice as they walked side by side. "There's a restaurant in Shoreham by Sea. I've reserved a discreet table." Louisa nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'll be there." In the elevator, they remained silent, carefully distant from each other, aware of the cameras and the other guests entering and exiting. When they reached her floor, Gabriel simply gave a discreet nod in farewell, but his eyes said much more. Back in her room, Louisa threw herself onto the bed, contemplating the ceiling as she tried to organize her thoughts. She picked up her phone and called the only person who could help her process this impossible situation. "Tell me you didn't sleep with him," was how Mary answered, without even saying hello. Louisa laughed, despite the tension. "Good morning to you too. And no, I didn't sleep with him, yet," Mary added, and Louisa could practically see her raising an eyebrow on the other end of the line. "What happened? You've been gone since yesterday." Louisa took a deep breath and recounted everything. The event, Isabella, Richard, the corridor, the kisses, the late-night message, the dinner scheduled for that evening. Mary listened in unusual silence, interrupting only with occasional "wow" and "oh my God." "So, I'm completely screwed, aren't I?" Louisa concluded, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "Maybe not," Mary replied thoughtfully. "You said the chemistry between you two is real, that it's not just physical attraction, but a deeper connection." "So what? Company policy doesn't have exceptions for deep connections." "But life does," Mary argued. "Lou, you've spent the last 3 years completely focused on your career. God knows how many dates you've cancelled, how many interesting guys you've turned down because you had reports to finalize or clients to impress. That matters." "Yes," Mary interrupted her firmly. "You deserve more than an existence devoted exclusively to work. You deserve someone who understands your passion for what you do, who respects your intelligence, who challenges you. What if that someone is precisely the person who can destroy everything I've built?" A thoughtful silence stretched between them. Finally, Mary sighed. "Then you have a difficult decision ahead," she said softly. "But at least go to dinner, talk. See what this really is before deciding if it's worth risking for him." After hanging up, Louisa remained motionless for a few minutes, absorbing her friend's advice. Mary was right. She needed to understand what she truly felt, what Gabriel truly wanted, before any decision. She got up and opened her closet, assessing the options she had brought. She chose a discreet red dress, elegant without being obviously provocative, complementing it with delicate earrings and slightly more elaborate makeup than during the day. She wanted to appear confident, but not desperate, attractive, but not as if she were deliberately trying to seduce. At 8 o'clock sharp, she went down to the lobby. Gabriel was already waiting for her, casually elegant in dark trousers and a light blue shirt, no tie, his silver watch discreetly reflecting the ambient lights. When he saw her, something in his gaze changed, a sparkle of admiration that made Louisa's stomach flutter. "You look beautiful," he said simply. When she approached, "Thank you," she replied, feeling her face warm slightly. He offered his arm, an old-fashioned but charming gesture. "Shall we go? The car is waiting." The drive to the restaurant took about 20 minutes along coastal roads that wound between hills and beaches. They exchanged pleasantries, the success of the event, the interest shown by investors, Charles Sterling's peculiarities, safe, neutral topics that allowed them to postpone the conversation that truly mattered. The restaurant was exactly as promised, discreet, elegant, with well-spaced tables and soft lighting. Their table was in a more secluded corner, with a view of the night sea where the moon drew a silver path over the dark waves. Only after their orders were taken and their wine glasses served did Gabriel finally touch on the subject that hung between them. "About last night," he began, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "I want you to know it wasn't impulsive on my part, or at least not entirely." "What do you mean?" Louisa asked, her fingers nervously playing with the stem of her glass. Gabriel took a sip of wine before answering, as if searching for the right words. "Since my first day at Apex, I noticed your competence, of course, but also your presence. The way you defend your ideas, how you lead your team, how you face challenges. He paused, a slight smile forming on his lips. Then came that audio. Louisa groaned, covering her face with her hands. Please, don't remind me. It was revealing, he continued, ignoring her discomfort, to know that this attraction wasn't unilateral, that you also felt something. It was mortifying, she corrected, lowering her hands. I thought I was going to be fired. I never thought of firing you, Gabriel admitted. Not for a second. Your value to the company goes far beyond a communication slip-up. His gaze became more intense. But I confess I started observing you more closely after that, professionally at first, but every interaction only confirmed what I already suspected, that you are extraordinary. Not just competent, but passionate about what you do, genuinely concerned with clients, with your team, and impossible to ignore. His words warmed something inside her, a validation that went beyond mere physical attraction. It was recognition of her work, of her worth, of who she was professionally. You're also impossible to ignore, Louisa admitted softly, no matter how hard I tried. Gabriel reached his hand across the table, his fingers gently touching hers. The first physical contact since the night before. His skin was warm, the touch gentle but firm. I know the situation is complicated, he said, his voice deeper. The implications for our careers, for the office dynamic. Company policy is clear, Louisa completed. Relationships between different hierarchical levels must be reported, and usually result in transfer or dismissal, Gabriel concluded when she hesitated. I know. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities. The waiter brought their dishes, momentarily breaking the tension. When they were alone again, Gabriel resumed the conversation. I have a proposal, he said, adjusting in his chair. Not a definitive solution, but a start. I'm listening. Let's explore this. What we feel, without pressure, without predefined expectations. Discreetly, for now. Louisa frowned. Are you suggesting a secret affair, meetings in empty conference rooms and anonymous hotels? No, Gabriel replied firmly. I'm suggesting we give ourselves time to understand what truly exists between us before making decisions that could permanently affect our careers. He was right. Louisa knew that. To rush, to formalize something that might just be a momentary attraction, a fleeting chemistry, would be imprudent. But the prospect of hidden meetings, lies by omission, the constant tension of almost being discovered, that wasn't the life she desired. What if we find out it's real? She asked, her eyes fixed on his, that it's not just attraction or momentary fascination. A slow smile formed on his face. Then we'll face it together, openly, with all the consequences. There was sincerity in his words, an implicit promise that warmed Louisa inside. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was honest, and perhaps it was all they could have at the moment. All right, she finally agreed, returning the smile. Let's see where this takes us. The rest of the dinner flowed with surprising naturalness. They talked about their lives outside of work, something they had never done before. She told him about her childhood in rural England, the daughter of teachers, the first in her family to attend university. He spoke about growing up in Manchester, about the decision to study abroad even against his father's wishes, a traditional businessman who expected his son to simply take over the family business. I disappointed my father when I chose to make my own way, Gabriel confessed, a vulnerability in his voice that Louisa had never perceived before, but I couldn't live the life he planned for me. Is he proud of you now? Louisa asked softly. A sad smile touched his lips. So he passed away before I returned from the States. He never knew of my professional success. He paused, looking out at the darkness of the sea beyond the window. It's one of my biggest regrets. Louisa reached out, covering his hand on the table. I'm so sorry. It's all right, he replied, turning his palm to intertwine their fingers. But it made me realize the importance of living authentically, of following what I believe is right, not just what's expected. There was depth in that confession, a window into a Gabriel few knew, not the ruthless director, but the man behind the title. Louisa felt privileged to glimpse this facet of him. After dinner, they walked along the beach, barefoot in the cool sand, letting the waves occasionally wet their feet. The full moon bathed everything in silver light. At some point, he held her hand, a simple gesture, but laden with meaning. "May I ask you something personal?" Louisa asked, observing his profile against the starry sky. "Of course. Why were you so angry with Richard last night? Was it really just because he has a bad reputation? Or was there something more?" Gabriel remained silent for a few steps, considering the question. Finally, he turned to face her, stopping walking. "Jealousy," he admitted simply. "Seeing him so close to you, about to kiss you, it was irrational. I know. I had no right to feel that way, but I did." His direct honesty caught her off guard. There were no games in his words, no attempt to hide vulnerability behind elaborate explanations or rational justifications. "I felt jealous too," she confessed, "of you and Isabella, even before I knew she was your cousin." Gabriel smiled, that rare smile that completely transformed his face. "We're a mess, aren't we?" "Completely," she agreed, returning the smile. He brought his hand to her face, gently tracing the curve of her cheek with his thumb. "A mess worth it, I hope." In response, she rose on her tiptoes, eliminating the distance between them. This time, the kiss didn't have the desperate urgency of their first encounter in the Brighton corridor, nor the cautious exploration on the beach. It was a kiss of promise, of decision, of beginning. When they finally separated, both breathless, the world around them seemed to have disappeared. There was no event, no apex, no hierarchy, just them, lost in each other. "This complicates everything," Louisa whispered, her forehead resting against his chest, listening to the rapid beats of his heart. "Yes," Gabriel agreed, his fingers tracing gentle circles on her back. "But maybe it's worth it." They stayed like that for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened, the line they had crossed. It was Gabriel who finally broke the silence. "We should go back," he said reluctantly. "Our absence must have been noticed by now." Louisa nodded, pulling away to compose herself. She adjusted her dress, checked that her makeup hadn't smudged, tried to tame her slightly disheveled hair. "How do I look?" she asked, feeling strangely shy under his gaze. "Perfect," Gabriel replied, with a smile she had never seen before. "Disarmed, genuine, almost vulnerable, but with a suspicious lipstick mark on your neck." Louisa's eyes widened, her hand flying to her neck. "What?" He laughed, a surprisingly light sound coming from him. "I'm kidding. You're impeccable." He paused, his eyes becoming serious again. "But we need to talk about this, about us, about how to proceed." "I know," she agreed, reality beginning to assert itself again. "But not now, not here. And tomorrow," he suggested, "after the meetings, we can have dinner somewhere quiet, away from the hotel." Louisa nodded. "Tomorrow." They returned to the event separately, minutes apart, like criminals trying not to arouse suspicion. The rest of the night was a blur for Louisa, polite smiles, automatic conversations, exchanging business cards. Her body was there, but her mind was completely occupied by the taste of his lips, the warmth of his touch, the promise of tomorrow. When she finally retired to her room hours later, she found a text message on her phone. "Can't stop thinking about you. Good night, G." Simple as that. Direct as that. And enough to keep her awake half the night, replaying every second of that encounter in the corridor, every word, every touch, every kiss. What had she done? What did it mean for her career, for her future at the company? And why, despite all the risks, couldn't she regret it? She fell asleep with those questions still unanswered, her phone clutched to her chest, his taste still on her lips, and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The morning arrived too quickly. At the office, the buzz about the extraordinary board meeting was already spreading. Louisa tried to concentrate on work, but it was hard to ignore the speculations running through the corridors. Mergers, acquisitions, staff cuts, all the alarming possibilities that usually accompanied unscheduled meetings. Around 11 a.m., Gabriel called her into his office. He was serious, more formal than in Brighton, but there was something in his eyes, a determination she didn't fully comprehend. "Close the door, please," he requested, indicating the chair in front of his desk. Louisa obeyed, sitting down with a pounding heart. "What happened at the meeting?" "Robert Clark is retiring," Gabriel replied directly. Robert was the chief operating officer, one of the company's longest-standing pillars. He announced it this morning, effective in 60 days. "That's unexpected," Louisa commented, trying to understand how it affected them. "There's more," Gabriel continued, leaning forward. "They're offering me his position." Louisa blinked, surprised. "That's incredible. Congratulations." "I haven't accepted yet," he said, watching her carefully, "because it changes things for us." "How so?" "As Chief Operating Officer, I would no longer directly supervise the customer service department," he explained. "Technically, I wouldn't be your immediate superior anymore. I'd still be higher in the hierarchy, of course, but far enough removed that there's no direct conflict of interest," Louisa completed, finally understanding. Gabriel nodded. "Exactly. We would have to report the relationship to HR, obviously, but policies are more flexible when there's no direct supervision." "Are you considering accepting because of me?" she asked, a mix of contradictory emotions stirring within her. "No," he replied honestly. "It's a promotion I would have accepted anyway. But the timing, it seems almost providential." A small smile touched his lips, almost as if the universe were conspiring in our favor. Louisa couldn't help but smile in response. "What if I said I didn't want to continue this, that Brighton was just a moment?" His eyes became serious again. "Then I would respect your decision. I would accept the promotion anyway, and we would return to a strictly professional relationship." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. There was no pressure, no manipulation, just the simple truth of a man who was willing to follow his path, with or without her. "But that's not what you want," Louisa observed softly. "No," Gabriel admitted, holding her gaze. "What I want is to wake up next to you, to know every facet of you, the brilliant professional I already know, but also the woman beyond the office. I want heated discussions about movies, books, politics. I want to see you relaxed, vulnerable, furious, all versions of Louisa Matthews." His words hit her with almost physical force. It wasn't just desire, it was something much deeper, more frightening, and more wonderful. "When do you need to give your answer?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling. "End of the week," he replied. "But whatever your decision, mine is already made. I'm going to accept the position. The rest is up to you." Louisa nodded, slowly standing up. "I need to think." "Of course," he agreed, remaining professional despite the intensity of the conversation. "Take all the time you need." The days that followed were a whirlwind for Louisa. She worked, met deadlines, led meetings, all on autopilot, while her mind buzzed with possibilities and risks. Mary was her constant confidant, patiently listening as she weighed pros and cons, opportunities and threats. "You're looking for obstacles where none exist," Mary finally declared on Thursday evening, after another session of circular debates. "The situation has resolved itself almost magically. He will no longer be your direct superior. You can have an open, honest relationship without harming your career." "What if it doesn't work out?" Louisa questioned, insecurity showing through. "What if it's just a phase, a fleeting attraction, and we break up in 2 months? What will it be like to work at the same company after that?" "What if it does work out?" Mary countered. "What if he's the love of your life, and you let it pass because you're scared?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. On Friday, the last day for Gabriel's decision, Louisa arrived at the office determined. She had spent the entire night reflecting, weighing alternatives, examining her deepest feelings. When she knocked on his office door, shortly before lunchtime, she was nervous but resolved. "Come in," the familiar voice called from within. Gabriel stood by the window, observing the city below. He turned when she entered, and something in his expression changed. It softened, as if her mere presence was enough to alleviate any tension. "I've made my decision," Louisa said without preamble, closing the door behind her. "And what is it?" he asked calmly, though his eyes betrayed anxiety. In response, she approached, stopping inches away. "I want to try," she said simply. "Us, for real. No secrets, no games. We report to HR as per policy, move forward, and see where this takes us." The smile that spread across his face was dazzling, not the controlled half-smile of the director, but something completely open, radiant. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands finding her waist. "Absolutely," she confirmed, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. It was a different kiss from the previous ones. There was no desperate urgency of their first encounter in the Brighton corridor, nor the cautious exploration on the beach. It was a kiss of promise, of decision, of beginning. When they separated, Gabriel kept his hands on her waist, his forehead resting against hers. "We'll face gossip," he warned, though his smile never wavered. "I've faced worse after that audio," Louisa replied with a soft laugh. "And HR bureaucracy. I've been filling out forms since I can remember. And probably some disapproving looks. People questioning if you slept your way to the top." Louisa pulled away slightly to look at him. "Let them question. We know the truth, and I'll continue to prove my worth with hard work as I always have." The pride in his gaze was almost tangible. "That's why I fell in love with you," he said softly. "Your strength, your integrity, your certainty of who you are." The word Vimar fell in love for hung between them, a confession neither had made until that moment. "I'm also in love with you," Louisa admitted, the words easier to say than she had imagined, probably since that first meeting, when you destroyed my presentation by pointing out flaws no one else had noticed. Gabriel laughed, the light, genuine sound filling the room. "A dream encounter, no doubt. We have very specific definitions of romance, apparently," she joked, allowing herself to relax in his arms. The following weeks brought exactly what they had predicted: the formalization of the relationship with HR, the inevitable gossip in the corridors, the curious glances when they entered the cafeteria together. But they also brought unexpected joys: impromptu dinners after long hours of work, weekends of mutual discovery, conversations that stretched late into the night. Gabriel officially took over as Chief Operating Officer, bringing his characteristic efficiency to the new role. Louisa continued to lead the customer service department, now reporting to a new commercial director, Isabella Vance, who had surprisingly accepted the invitation to join Apex. "You knew about this?" Louisa asked Gabriel when the announcement was made. "Perhaps," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "Let's just say that having my brilliant cousin on the team was one of the conditions for accepting the promotion." "Manipulative," she accused without real reprimand. "Strategic," he corrected, kissing her softly. Contrary to many pessimistic expectations, the relationship strengthened over time. They maintained absolute professionalism in the workplace, but outside of it, they built something genuine, a partnership based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and increasingly deep love. 6 months after the official start of their relationship, during an ordinary dinner on a regular Tuesday, Gabriel surprised Louisa with a small velvet box. "It's not a proposal," he clarified immediately upon seeing her shocked expression. "Not yet, it's too soon, and I know we have a lot to build together first. It's just—" He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a single sapphire, a symbol of promise. "That I am committed to this path, to you, to us." Louisa felt tears in her eyes as she extended her hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered, "and I am also committed. Completely." 2 weeks later, Mary appeared at the apartment Louisa now shared with Gabriel, radiant and eager to share news. "I met someone," she announced, dramatically throwing herself onto the sofa. "And it's your fault, in a way." "Mine?" Louisa asked, confused. "Remember that design event you invited me to last month, where Apex was sponsoring the cocktail reception?" Mary explained, her eyes sparkling. "I met Philip there. He's a graphic designer on Apex's creative team, totally eccentric, completely brilliant, and I think I'm in love." Louisa hugged her friend, genuinely happy for her. "I want to meet him, officially. I mean, I must have seen him in the corridors." "Sunday," Mary promised. "Lunch here, I'll bring him for official inspection." In the months that followed, life continued to surprise Louisa. Her career progressed, with Isabella as a mentor. She expanded the customer service department, implementing innovative ideas that had been rejected by previous management. Gabriel fully embraced his new role, bringing efficiency and strategic vision that quickly impressed even the most skeptical on the board. At home, they built a surprisingly harmonious routine. He, methodical and structured; she, more spontaneous and adaptable. They complemented each other in ways neither had anticipated. Discussions were frequent, sometimes heated. Both had strong personalities and firm opinions, but always honest, always respectful. On a sunny Saturday, almost a year after everything began, Louisa woke up feeling strangely nauseous. Initially, she attributed it to the previous night's dinner, but when the discomfort persisted for the following days, a suspicion began to form. The test, discreetly bought at a pharmacy far from their neighborhood, confirmed it. She was pregnant. Approximately 6 weeks, she calculated mentally. That night, while Gabriel prepared dinner, he had discovered that cooking relaxed him after stressful days at the office. Louisa watched him from the kitchen table, trying to gather the courage to share the news. They hadn't planned this, not now. They were focused on their careers, on solidifying their relationship. A baby would change everything. "You're quiet," he observed, turning from the sink where he was chopping vegetables. "Difficult day." Surprising day," she replied, taking a deep breath. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone must have alerted him. He put down the knife, washed his hands, and approached, sitting opposite her. "What is it?" he asked, concern evident on his face. Louisa decided on the direct approach. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, he just stared at her, as if the words were taking time to process. Then, slowly, a smile began to form on his face. Not the controlled smile of the executive, nor even the warm smile of the lover, but something entirely new, almost reverent. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word like a blessing on his lips. "We're having a baby." She nodded, feeling the first tears escape. "We didn't plan this. I know it's early, that it might complicate everything, that—" He interrupted her, standing up to pull her into a tight embrace. "It's perfect," he murmured against her hair. "Absolutely perfect. You're not worried?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Gabriel pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands gently holding her face. "Of course I'm worried. I'll probably go into full panic mode in about 15 minutes. A wide smile lit up his face. "But right now, at this very moment, I can only feel joy, pure and complete joy." The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions: doctor's appointments, rushed plans, sleepless nights discussing names, schools, work arrangements. They decided on full transparency at the office, aware that eventually the pregnancy would become evident. To Louisa's surprise, the reaction at Apex was surprisingly positive. The same people who had raised eyebrows when the relationship began now appeared with genuine advice and congratulations. Isabella was particularly enthusiastic, immediately appointing herself honorary aunt and promising excessive spoiling for the child. "Are you planning extended maternity leave?" she asked during a lunch weeks later. "I haven't decided yet," Louisa admitted. "Part of me wants full time with the baby, but another part fears losing professional ground," Isabella completed with understanding. "It's a dilemma many of us face." "Exactly," Louisa sighed, relieved to be understood. "Gabriel says he'll support me whatever my decision, but you want it all," Isabella smiled. "The career, the family, the perfect balance. You know what? I think you'll get it." Those words stayed with Louisa in the months that followed, as her body changed and the reality of imminent motherhood became increasingly concrete. She worked until her 8th month, implementing systems that would allow her team to function efficiently during her absence, training her temporary replacement, preparing for the inevitable time away. Helen was born on a rainy autumn morning, small, healthy, and surprisingly calm. When the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, Louisa felt a wave of love so intense it almost suffocated her. Beside her, Gabriel wept without shame or reserve, a vulnerability she had never witnessed in him. "She's perfect," he whispered, reverently touching the tiny face. "Like you, the first few months were a controlled chaos of sleepless nights, bottles, diapers, and a joy so profound that sometimes Louisa could barely believe her luck." Gabriel proved to be a surprisingly practical father. He changed diapers with the same efficiency with which he conducted board meetings, prepared bottles in the middle of the night without complaint, insisted on equally sharing all responsibilities. "We are partners," he always said whenever she tried to spare him a task, "in everything." It was during her maternity leave that Louisa began to develop the idea that would eventually become her greatest contribution to Apex, a corporate support program for parents, allowing flexible hours, partial remote work, and support structures that facilitated the balance between career and family. When she returned to work, after 6 months at home with Helen, she formally presented the project to the board. Gabriel, remaining true to his promise to separate personal and professional life in the corporate environment, was one of the most incisive questioners during the presentation, but also the first to vote in favor when the time came for the decision. The program was first implemented as a pilot, then expanded to the entire company, and eventually became a differentiator for Apex in the market, attracting talent that valued work-life balance. On a quiet Sunday, when Helen was almost 2 years old, the family gathered in Louisa's parents' small garden for a special event, her wedding to Gabriel. They chose a simple ceremony with only close family and friends. Mary, of course, was the maid of honor, now formally engaged to Philip, the eccentric designer who had completely won her heart. At the improvised altar under a century-old tree, with Helen as their adorable and clumsy flower girl, Louisa and Gabriel exchanged vows they had personally written. Honest, sometimes funny, deeply emotional words. "We promise to build a life where both can shine," he said, eyes fixed on hers, "where no dream is too small to be pursued, no ambition too great to be supported." "We promise to always remember that we are partners," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "equal in value, different in approach, complementary in vision." When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, the kiss they exchanged was accompanied by enthusiastic applause and, surprisingly, laughter. Helen had chosen that moment to hug both their legs, almost knocking them over in the process. During the small reception that followed, Louisa found a moment to sit with Mary, watching Gabriel spin a giggling Helen on the improvised dance floor. "Who would have thought, huh?" Mary commented, smiling as she watched the scene. "That disastrous audio would lead you to this," Louisa chuckled, shaking her head. "I still die of embarrassment when I remember." "You shouldn't," Mary replied, surprisingly serious. "It was the turning point, not just at work, but in life. An embarrassing mistake that ended up being the best accident in your story." Watching Gabriel approach with Helen in his arms, the smile he reserved only for them lighting up his face, Louisa couldn't help but agree. Sometimes, the greatest successes really are born from the most embarrassing mistakes, and she was grateful every day for that slip-up that had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined.